Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tracking the Tropics. I'm meteorologist Wes Hohenstein in Raleigh, North Carolina. When you got out of bed yesterday morning, Laura was a tropical storm with 65-mile-per-hour winds. Today, it became a Category 4 hurricane. Winds just increased again at the 8 o'clock hour to 150 miles an hour, and it's expected to make landfall later tonight in southwest Louisiana. So tonight, we're going to hear from meteorologists in Arkansas and Alabama to break down everything you need to know. But let's start with the very latest on Hurricane Laura, which is now, listen to this, the strongest hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico since Katrina in 2005. We all know how bad Katrina was. Laura has the potential to do just as much damage to our friends in southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana. Again, we just got the 8 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center. There's a Hurricane Hunter aircraft out in the storm right now. 150-mile-per-hour winds. They increased yet again. Gusts are up to 175. The pressure has dropped again. 940 millibars, and the important thing to know about that is the lower the pressure goes, usually a residual effect is the winds go up, it's getting stronger. So lower pressure is bad. Higher pressure, if you think about it, you want high pressure over you on a spring or fall or summer day. It gives you sunny skies and dry weather. But low pressure is the opposite. Low pressure makes these storms stronger. And it's moving north-northwest at 15 miles per hour. So this is the last 6 to 12 hours. And the yellow line is the historical track. And if you watch the last few frames, do you notice how the storm, the very well-defined eye, look how it's moving more north than northwest. If that trend continues, that could very well bring it ashore a little sooner. It could also bring it ashore a little farther to the east, which the farther east it goes, the worse it is for our friends in Lafayette and central South Louisiana. Obviously, the farther west it goes, the worse it is for our friends in Lake Charles and Beaumont and Port Arthur and Orange, Texas. So little shifts in a storm that's about 400 to 500 miles wide is going to make a big difference by the time it's all said and done. So let's talk now about what's going on with the current conditions, because as we head throughout the night, this is going to turn more into a forecasting event and to a nowcasting event. So what we have here is you can see the radar overlaid with current wind gust, and look at this gust at an oil rig just south of the Louisiana coast, gusting up to 76 miles per hour. Those type of wind gusts will move inland as we head throughout the night. They've had a busy day already in South Louisiana. At one point, as we look at live radar, they had 5 active tornado warnings. And those type of heavy rain events with the outer rain bands will bring the possibility of more tornadoes later tonight. So it's expected to continue to march north, making landfall right around the Texas-Louisiana state line, probably more likely in southwest Louisiana as a Category 4 hurricane with 150-mile-per-hour winds, then continuing to move inland, spreading wind and rain right along the state line, especially in western Louisiana, eastern Texas, be a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm over Shreveport sometime on Thursday afternoon. But listen, this thing still has the potential to strengthen even more. Remember, a Category 5 hurricane, winds are 157 miles per hour. So we're only 7 miles per hour away from this becoming a Category 5 hurricane. There have only been 4 Cat 5s, only 4 of them in our entire history in the United States that have made landfall as a Cat 5. Let's hope this doesn't become one, but listen, it is within the realm of possibility. After it moves inland and continues to weaken, spreading rain up through Arkansas, it's going to take a hard right turn as it gets absorbed by a cold front, and that could bring some rain to the Ohio Valley as well as parts of the East Coast. But tonight, on this Wednesday evening, as Louisiana and Texas gets ready for one of the stronger hurricanes this country has ever seen. Most of Louisiana is under some type of hurricane warning and tropical storm warning. That includes our friends in Lafayette, Louisiana. They're in nonstop coverage right now at KLFY. Let's jump in and see what they're covering tonight. That's their meteorologist, Heath. We talked to him a couple nights ago. They're talking about some of the rain accumulations. So, you know, when hurricanes come ashore, storm surge, wind, and rain are the big problems, and the rainfall forecasts are in excess of 6 to 8 inches at their worst. And then all that rain trickles down into the lakes and the streams and the rivers, and then a couple days later you could have some river flooding. So that's one of the things Heath is talking about right now. Let's listen in for a second.
Into Sunday. So here's the forecast for us: 55 to 95 mile per hour winds, 100 plus, especially over parts of Acadia Parish, western Acadia Parish, I should say, and then parts of Jeff Davis Parish. 3 to 6 inches of rain, 7 to 12 possible in isolated areas, and then storm surge 6 to 15 feet. And we could see the tornadoes as we're on the bad side of this system, and that could set up the possibility of some tornadoes as we go through tonight and tomorrow. As a matter of fact, we are under a slight risk for tornadoes, and that covers out of a 5. We haven't had severe weather season in a while, but it's been a couple months. But if you remember, a slight risk is about a 2 out of 5. But these tropical systems can produce tornadoes, and I think the bigger risk could be across parts of Alabama, Mississippi, Florida Panhandle as we head through tomorrow, and we could definitely see that as well. So we're here. We're going to be here for you all night long. If you feel like you're not at ease, you're nervous, just to let you know that we're going to give you all the information that we're getting, and I'm going to be giving all the weather information. Meteorologist Trevor Saulnier's here. Meteorologist Chris Kozart comes in early tomorrow morning. So bear with us, stay with us, and watch us, and we will get you through this. The good news is for Acadiana, the worst of it will be west of us.
All right, and that was a live look in to KLFY in Lafayette, Louisiana. They've already started their nonstop coverage. They're going to go through this all night, overnight. So Lafayette right here, they cover all of this part of Louisiana. And unfortunately, as we've been showing you, we're now looking at the radar and satellite. That's where Laura could be headed. And, you know, two things occur to me as we've been watching this. You know, number one, you know, our friends in New Orleans who have had just a rough go over the years with hurricanes, and Houston, Texas, the 4th largest city, 2.5 million people in our country, are avoiding this hurricane. But unfortunately, Beaumont to Lafayette, Port Arthur and Orange and Lake Charles, they're about ready to have a really rough time. This is hitting overnight. And if you think back of all the hurricanes that have hit over the years, doesn't it seem like more times than not they hit overnight? So we'll be thinking a lot about our friends down in Louisiana and East Texas tonight. Let's bring in our first guest tonight. I want to bring back in Jeff Baskin. We talked to Jeff over the last couple of nights. Jeff's in Little Rock, Arkansas. Jeff, you spent a lot of time covering hurricanes in Louisiana. And obviously, you've been on Tracking the Tropics with us several times over the years. Let me just get your initial thoughts on what has happened the last 24 hours in this Cat 4 monster.
Well, this is one of those nightmare scenarios, and something that we've been really concerned about over the last couple of days is that we would get this rapid intensification. We've seen that with several hurricanes over the Gulf of Mexico. We had that happen with Hurricane Harvey, pretty much near where Laura is right now, just in the northwestern Gulf of Mexico, as well as Hurricane Michael just a couple of years ago. That exploded from a Category 1 to a Category 4 in just less than 24 hours. Katrina was another one that intensified explosively, going from a Category 2 to a Category 5 pretty much overnight, and we've had that intensification with Laura. Now, Wes, one thing that you were mentioning earlier, the motion of the storm, and we've seen a little bit more of a northerly motion here in the short term, but a lot of times with these powerful hurricanes, they don't move in a smooth, straight line. They take a little bit more of a stair-step motion, so you might see it move to the north, and then it wobbles to the west, and then to the north again. So when you look at the hourly position differences, you might think that it's really taking a hard turn, but not necessarily, because we're likely to see a couple more wobbles to the west, a couple more wobbles to the north, with that likely landfall near the Sabine Pass in the northwest Gulf of Mexico. Now, as we take a look at the currents, as Wes was saying, winds 150 miles per hour. The pressure just continues to plummet. The hurricane hunters have been in there they're in there right now looking at the latest information coming on in. They're about to do another pass through the eye wall. In the last pass, they found winds, flight level winds, about 140 knots, and that's why the winds now increased in the last advisory to 150 miles per hour. And it's possible in this next pass, they may even find a pressure lower than 940 millibars. And once you start talking about hurricanes in terms of pressure down into the 930s, 920s, you're starting to get close to your Category 5 type hurricanes. Now, let's take a look at the intensification of this over the last 48 hours. And this was as it came off of Cuba, remember, on Monday, and then coming out through the Gulf of Mexico and then rapidly intensifying. You can see that eye coming on out. And look at the wind change here, starting off as a tropical storm coming off of Cuba, intensifying into a hurricane, and then really blowing up last night and going into this morning. And the reason for that, the warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Something similar happened with Hurricane Katrina, where it moved over a very warm area of water, what we call the loop current in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's when it explosively intensified. And that's one of those lessons that you learn, that you really have to watch for these warm eddies of water, these warm pockets in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, as far as surface water temperatures, the entire Gulf is pretty warm. But when you take into account the depth of that warm water, you have some very warm spots, one of which in the Western Gulf and very warm waters off of Cuba. But as soon as Laura moved into some of these higher heat content areas of the Gulf of Mexico, that's when that explosive intensification beginning, going from a 1 to a 2, where you see the red, to a 3, and then to a Category 4, moving over that very warm water. And those water temperatures don't change very much through landfall, but at this rate of intensification, it's not out of the question that we couldn't get a little bit more in the way of intensification. It really would only take a little bit more strengthening to bring this up to Category 5 status. Right now, winds of 150, 156 miles per hour winds would make this a Category 5 and an unprecedented event for landfall, one of the most rare events, a Category 5 hurricane making landfall in the U.S.
Yeah, Jeff, you know, that water in some spots in the Gulf of Mexico is close to 90 degrees. I mean, that's bath and shower water. Hang tight for a second, Jeff. I want to ask my director, Justin, to pull up weather graphics, because we're going to talk about how this is going to make landfall and then head up in your neck of the woods. I want to show you kind of the hour-by-hour rain situation. This is one of our in-house computer models, and we're going to pick it up pretty much right where we are right now. So from 8 o'clock on the East Coast, you can see the outer rain bands have reached. And that's something that's always important to meteorologists when they're talking about computer model forecasts. If I were to show you a computer model forecast and they had the current time and the forecast position like somewhere way over here or already inland, you can't pay attention to that. But one thing that has happened over the past 24 to 48 hours, the computer models have been in really consistent, good agreement, and accurate forecast with what's going to happen. So let's keep that in mind as we watch where this storm is expected to go. Again, some of the worst of the weather, look at that, in the overnight hours when we're supposed to be asleep, and they're not going to be sleeping much overnight from East Texas to Southwest Louisiana. Heavy, heavy rain, wind gusts 60, 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. And it's going to last for several hours. The storm finally making landfall in the early morning hours, and then it'll start to weaken. But it's a huge storm with really powerful winds, so it's going to take it a while. So even through 7 a.m. through noontime, there's still going to be some pretty significant winds in central North Carolina, some of the heaviest rain, Louisiana, I said North Carolina, some of the heaviest rain in northern Louisiana through lunchtime. And then look, as we get into Thursday, it doesn't have that well-defined eye anymore, but tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, 24 hours from now, it's still going to be producing some decent winds and some heavy rain for parts of central Arkansas. So let me bring Jeff back in up in Little Rock. And Jeff, you know, this is one thing that you guys are concerned with, not with storm surge, but some wind gusts and some heavy rain is headed your way in Arkansas.
Well, since this is such a powerful storm, it's going to take a while for it to really wind down. Like when you look at the forecast track coming out through Louisiana and into Arkansas, this only barely drops below, Laura, only barely drops below hurricane strength as it crosses I-20 in northern Louisiana. So around Shreveport, still close to hurricane strength. And notice the storm coming almost right through central Arkansas, very close to Little Rock area, likely still at tropical storm strength. Winds of 40 miles per hour, possibly some gusts 50 to 60 miles per hour with some very heavy rain, as well as a tornado threat likely on the eastern side of the circulation. A lot of times with a landfalling system, you can get tornadoes, you can get areas of rotation within some of those bands, especially on the eastern side of the circulation, not necessarily right near the center, but on the eastern side. And that's something that we're going to be very concerned about going into late tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night, and Friday morning. And then the system continues to weaken, weakening to a depression likely over northeast Arkansas, and then quickly moving on out. Now, one of the concerns that we have in Arkansas, Wes, is that the storm is going to change direction. It's going to start to take a little bit more of a turn towards the north and east as it begins to get picked up by a front, and that could actually make it slow down a little bit as it starts to make that turn right into central Arkansas, and that's going to exacerbate that heavy rainfall risk. Right now, 3 to 6 inches of rain for central Arkansas. We could be looking at localized amounts. Wouldn't be surprised to see some localized amounts up to about 8 inches of rain. And then the system starts to accelerate towards the north and east as it starts to get picked up by a front. But in the meantime, we're looking at the potential for some very heavy rain. And overall, it's been a pretty wet summer for Arkansas. And in addition, we actually had some very heavy rains across parts of western Arkansas early this morning and a few scattered showers around today. And that just makes the ground less able to take more heavy, sustained rainfall. So the combination of the wet ground, heavy rainfall, and then those gusty winds over a period of hours and hours and hours, we're probably looking at some pretty serious power outage concerns as we go into tomorrow night. This is going to be a very significant event for Arkansas, not only in terms of wind, but in terms of rainfall, flooding potential, and possibly even isolated tornadoes, especially the eastern half of the state on the eastern side of that circulation.
Yeah, all this coming to Arkansas. Hurricane impacts in Arkansas. It's not something we hear often, but unfortunately it's what we're dealing with right now. Jeff in Little Rock, excellent stuff as usual. You guys be safe. We'll talk to you down the road. Jeff, I'm going to bring in our friend in Mobile, Alabama, Ed Bloodsworth. Ed, you too have spent a lot of time, whether it's been in Alabama or in Florida, covering hurricanes. Let's kind of start you off tonight with what are your thoughts? I mean, what an amazing 24 hours it's been for this hurricane.
Yeah, and I was actually listening a bit to your conversation about the rapid intensification that this system underwent and is still actually in the process of undergoing. And, you know, this is not the first time that this has been noted. Of course, you remember, harken back to the 2005 season with Rita, Katrina, Wilma did the same thing. I remember back in 2004 with Hurricane Charlie, that went through a rapid intensification cycle in the Gulf of Mexico. And it just, you know, kind of points out that, you know, overall forecasting the track of these thunderstorms has greatly improved over the last couple of decades, but hurricane intensity forecasting is still a very, very difficult science and very difficult to do, as we've been finding out. But and remember, last couple of days we were watching these, and I think most of the weather community kind of had an inkling that the conditions were set for this rapid intensification cycle. But you know, I think this is doing what Michael did 2 years ago, where we had a storm strengthen all the way up until landfall, and you know, that appears to be what this system is doing. But another thing I've kind of noticed is just the wide-ranging impacts from this. The hurricane hunters, you know, we got to give our hats off to these folks. They've been doing some amazing work. And, you know, when we saw this just prior to the 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central advisory, when they penetrated that eye wall, and we saw those winds over 150 miles per hour. I mean, that's a pretty impressive cyclone with it just being a couple of hours from landfall. And even our area, we've been seeing impacts from this. Of course, the wave activity has been tremendous. I think 34-foot waves I'm seeing near the center. But our part of the Gulf Coast, we've been getting swells on the order of 7 to 10 up towards of 12 feet on our part of the coast. So our wave activity in our Gulf has been churned up tremendously the last couple of days. Of course, we had Marco just a few days back there, Wes.
Yeah, it's a huge storm. I mean, if you go by cloud structure, I mean, it's almost 500 miles wide. Ed, you bring up something about Marco. You know, Marco has kind of already been forgotten for a lot of people since Laura has moved in right behind it. But you guys actually had some decent impacts from Tropical Storm Marco.
Yeah, we had some pretty good rainfall, especially when that system moved in. It actually really affected our coverage area in northwest Florida. Of course, remember when Marco started to come ashore, it actually, sort of split. We had the wind shear kind of just take advantage of that system and rip it apart. So the center started to actually move towards the mouth of the Mississippi, but we received all the rain from that. Some areas got around 4 to 5 inches of rain, so not the most significant rain event we've had. But even earlier this week, we were having waves around 6-7 feet. And, this time of year, summer on the Gulf Coast, people like to go and hit the beach, and they haven't been able to do that. Also, we had about 20 water rescues, over 24 water rescues, I should say, this past weekend near Pensacola Beach. Had some water rescues from folks getting trapped in those rip currents. So we've had dozens of rescues in the last couple of days from folks not heeding the warnings. On our side of the Gulf, when you get those double red flags, there's a reason why they're up there. We always urge folks not to go in the water, and that risk is actually going to stay elevated even after Laura makes landfall.
Yeah, Ed, it's summertime. It's hard to tell people to stay off the beach, but it always happens every time a tropical system comes aboard. We talked to Jeff. It's going to move into Arkansas, and then there's a cold front. I mean, this thing's going to absorb that, and then we're going to be talking about the leftovers even as we head into the weekend.
Yeah, and that's what I think is going to be, sort of the secondary story is that as this system moves inland, because it is so strong and so large, the wind field has expanded quite a bit. I mean, as you just talked there earlier, they're going to have tropical storm force gusts all the way through central Arkansas, and even potentially in some of those banding features that still are left over, perhaps in far western Tennessee, they could have tropical storm force gusts. So you're talking about a wide spread of power outages for some major metropolitan areas that could be without powers for several days, and of course near landfall up to a couple of weeks, depending on how well the power grids are able to sustain the winds like this. But yeah, so even as we're talking about the landfall, I know we've been talking a lot about the surge impacts, which are going to be tremendous. This is going to be affecting a large number of people, even after the system makes that sharp right turn and eastward turn. They're still going to get some gusty conditions with this across the Tennessee Valley and all the way into the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic towards your neck of the woods.
Yeah, we are expecting a little bit of leftover rain here in central North Carolina as we head into the weekend. But we, like everyone else around the country, is excited about an August cold front. Doesn't happen too often. So good stuff. That's Ed Bloodsworth down at WKRG in Mobile, Alabama. We'll talk to you down the road, Ed. You guys stay safe there along the Gulf Coast. Of course, the storm making impact well to the west of where Ed is. But I want to talk about some more of the impacts that are going to spread across what's happening elsewhere across the Gulf Coast. Actually, I want to dip back into Lafayette, Louisiana's coverage. This is KLFY, and we've been watching them for the last couple of hours. They're in nonstop coverage. This reporter, I can't remember his name, I apologize. He's actually down in Delcombe, Louisiana. It is a very popular shipping town. They do a lot of shrimping, and I think he's talking to a shrimper. Let's listen in.
Spirits up, because we're staying busy, man. Thank you so much for joining us. Acadiana, be sure to stay locked in. We're going to bring you updates some more stories. Just trying to keep it going here in Delcombe. I'm Gerald Gruen at KLFY News 10.
Thank you, Gerald. Of course, he's been live out there in Delcombe throughout tonight and will be later on. And we've seen the wind gusts there, heard them rather, and seen the water rising there as well.
All right, here to give us another look at exactly what it is that Laura is expected to do when she does come our way. Let's check in once again with.
All right, so we're kind of red zoning it, a la the NFL, kind of dipping into the coverage of KLFY in Lafayette, Louisiana, as they're getting ready for what's going to be a monstrous storm and a long night for them. We'll keep an eye on them. But as we wrap up the show, I want to kind of finish with some of the big impacts that we're expecting with this storm. First being the wind. So this is a great graphic of the wind forecast. Every time you see yellow, those are 39-mile-per-hour winds. Those are tropical storm force winds. And that magic number of 39, let's just call it 40 miles per hour. That's usually when the trees start to snap, and then after that, power goes out. Trees are falling on cars and houses. So this is a magic number, unfortunately. And as we pick up the forecast from where we are right now, they're already starting to see some wind gusts. But the worst of the weather, when it makes landfall, about 2 or 3 in the morning, they'll be seeing in excess of 74, 75 mile per hour hurricane force winds, really from East Texas all the way over to Lafayette. I mean, that's about 150, almost 200 mile swath, large area of winds. Even as we get into Thursday morning, once the sun is up at 9 a.m., still tropical storm force winds, enough to knock down trees, Shreveport, Monroe. It's still windy along the I-10 corridor in Louisiana. And then some significant weakening, but still breezy as we head into Thursday afternoon and Thursday night. We talked to Jeff in Little Rock. I mean, they're expecting possibly some strong wind gusts leading to power outages in addition to the rain as we head into Thursday night. Here's kind of a different synopsis of the wind forecast. So here we are now Thursday morning at 1 a.m. The system about to make landfall, and watch how the wind gusts just skyrocket. I mean, Lake Charles could have a wind gust between 80 and 90 miles per hour. And then as we get to 8 a.m. Thursday, Jasper, Texas, that's far east Texas, close to 70, still gusting to 70 miles per hour in Lake Charles. Alexandria, 55 miles per hour. So Thursday morning is going to be very rough, and not just in the overnight hours for our friends in Louisiana. And then 11 a.m., the storm's up around Shreveport, and you can see wind gusts will gust pretty high up there between 40 and 50 miles per hour. And then things finally start to calm down in Louisiana as we get into Thursday afternoon. Storm surge is another big problem. It's not an impact that affects people inland. This is something where as a hurricane's moving close to land, it's picking up water, making the ocean literally rise. Plus you have the waves on top of that. They're going to see the storm surge, the water rise anywhere from 15 to 20 feet at its worst in and around Lake Charles. Remember, the storm has a giant counterclockwise circulation. So the winds on the west side are blowing out most of the time. The winds on the east side are blowing in. So it's that blowing in addition to a few other things, that results in a storm surge that could send the water 2 to 3 feet above where it normally is. And let me talk a little bit about the history of what's about to happen overnight to southwest Louisiana. This is a great graphic from our friend Phil Klausbach at Colorado State University. He was on Tracking the Tropics with us a little earlier this season. And if you are a hurricane enthusiast, in the good sense, not in the bad sense, he's a great follow on Twitter. But he put this out earlier today. This is a map of all the Category 4 and 5 landfalls in our country's history. And for us, that means we go all the way back to 1851. Everywhere is a yellow dot was a Category 4 landfall, red dot Category 5. And remember, there have only been 4 Cat 5 landfalls in our country's history. So Laura is going to make landfall right around southwest Louisiana. That part of southwest Louisiana has never experienced a storm this strong. They've had it farther east, in and around New Orleans. They've had a couple of them. Houston and Galveston, they've had some storms that strong. But this part of Louisiana has always dodged the bullet. They've always lucked out, and it doesn't look to be the case tonight. So a historic storm about ready to hit a part of our country that has never had anything this strong before. And we've done a lot of comparisons, and I'll finish on this with you tonight. Hurricane Laura has had quite a path through the Gulf of Mexico. It was down around Cuba, now about 100 miles south of the coast of Louisiana, expected to make landfall overnight and then shoot up through western Louisiana. I can compare this very easily to 2 other storms, Rita in 2005 and Ike in 2008. It's eerie how similar those paths were. Both Rita and Ike were devastating storms. Ike more toward parts of Texas, but Rita came right up to that state line of Texas and Louisiana, and that's possibly where Laura is going to end up overnight tonight. We will continue to keep an eye on Hurricane Laura. If you're watching us from that neck of the woods tonight, we wish you well. It's going to be a long night, but we're thinking about you in Louisiana and Texas. We will continue to cover Hurricane Laura right here on Tracking the Tropics. We appreciate you spending your night with us. For Ed, for Jeff, for everyone who's made this possible tonight, I'm Wes Hohenstein in Raleigh, North Carolina. Have a great evening.